Hi, this is National Master Dan Heisman, and we're here with another video to help you improve your chess game. I noticed on the YouTube channels that videos that say win at chess get a lot of hits. So I thought that's a very interesting name for a video, because while your goal in playing a chess game is to win, of course winning depends on doing better than your opponent. And in the long run, all my videos, or a high percentage of them, are all about improving at chess, with the idea that if you improve, then you win more. So I thought I'd do sort of a tongue-in-cheek video here, a little bit more of a podcast kind of thing, about, win at chess instead of getting better. So we have to ask a couple questions, which one would be, if most of my videos are getting better, and instead I'm making a video on winning, how could you win without getting better? Well, one way you could do that is to have your opponents play worse. That sounds silly, but you could do that. I mean, if you have trouble beating up on the 8-year-olds, then maybe you should start picking on the 7-year-olds, and eventually you'll win more games. I always tell my students, which would you rather do? Would you rather play 100 games where you scholars mate your opponent on every game because they just learned how to play yesterday? Or would you rather play 100 games against someone a little better than you and have a bad day and lose all 100? Which one would be more interesting? And almost everybody says, well, they hate to lose all 100 games, but they'd rather play 100 games against someone a little better than them and lose all 100 than scholar mate someone 100 times in a row, because it's really boring. So when I see a video that says win at chess, I mean, we could have a scholar's mate. We could tell you to try for scholar's mate in every game, and if people don't see it, then you win, and you say, wow, that Dan Heisman taught me how to win. He taught me scholar's mate, and some of the people that I play don't know it, and I win the game in 4 moves. Well, okay, that's true, but I haven't had any videos on playing scholar's mate, or maybe some on avoiding it, but that's not really what I'm trying to do. So let's talk a little bit about that again. So how do you win at chess? Well, first of all, chess, if played perfectly by both sides, is a draw. So in order to win at chess, your opponent has to make mistakes. Well, if your opponent has to make mistakes, then you have to have someone who's capable of making mistakes. Well, that's every human. So if you play the very best computers and you're trying to win, you're probably not going to be winning. So if this video is to play and win, my first advice would be, avoid AlphaZero and Stockfish and, Komodo Dragon and those guys. You probably could play the rest of your life and not win a game. All right, so we can find weaker opponents for you. And in fact, when I was used to teach a lot of players who would play on the ICC a lot, I would look at the history of their opponents. And sometimes their opponents would win like 80% of their games. Does that mean their opponents were really good to win 80% of your games? Well, I guess if you're Magnus Carlsen and you're not playing the other top players in the world, you could certainly easily win 80% of your games. But the nature of chess is that if you play in tournaments, they use Swiss system, which pairs you against people that are doing about as well as you are. So if you're playing in a lot of tournaments, you don't really have that problem of trying to win a lot of games, in the sense that you're almost always playing people pushing near where you are, so you end up winning about half your games no matter how good you are. Sure, the very best players win more than half, and the very worst players win less than half, but it tends to push you toward the half. So, if you're one of those people who won 80% of their games, I had a name for people like that. I didn't call them great players, I called them bullies. Why were they bullies? Because if you use the rating system, if you play people 100 points below you, you win 64% of the points. 200 points below you is 76% of the points. 300 points below you is 84% of the points. I think that's right. So in order to win 80% of the points, you have to play people on the average that are 250 points below you. So if you play 1,000 games on a server and you win 80% of the games, if you're not one of the best players in the world, then the only way you could do that is by playing people who average 250 points below you. But that you have to consciously do. You have to seek them out so you can beat them. And that's why I call them bullies, because they're really not playing for, competition and to see how they can push themselves and learn and see how well they can do. They just want to find people weak enough that they can win almost all their games. Okay, so that's probably the number one way. If I make a video that says win at chess, the best way to win at chess is find terrible players and play them. Okay, so if you go and play in a quad in a USCF tournament, you tell the tournament director, yes, I know I'm rated 1300, but put me in a quad with people rated 600 so I can win all my games. So I always find it kind of funny when as I said, when I see these videos say win at chess. Now, it makes it sound like there's some sort of secret to winning. Like, for instance, here's my secret for winning at chess. On the 17th move of each game, always play G4. Doesn't matter whether you're white or black. Doesn't matter whether it's legal or not. Play G4 on the 17th move. That's the secret. The secret of winning is to play G4. Okay, so that's what you need to do. And if you play G4 and you win, let me know. All right. Now, we've talked a lot about getting better at chess in the other videos. So today I want to just talk about some more about how do you win a game? Well, if you win a game, we just said that chess if played perfectly by both sides is a draw. So how do you actually win? Well, you need an opponent who makes a mistake, but almost every human will make a mistake. And if you play people at your own level, they'll make mistakes. But you have to do things that are at your normal level or better, which means to some extent you want to play your best on every move. I tell all my students, it doesn't matter what you do during the game if you don't play your best. If you can't look yourself in the mirror at the end of the game and say, I tried my best on every move and I did the best I could, then your winning percentage is going to be better than if you look in the mirror and say, wow, on those 3 or 4 moves I really played too fast, or I didn't try very hard, or I lost my concentration. I've taught a lot of people over the years, and this idea of playing too fast on a move, losing your concentration, all these reasons why people don't play as well on one move as they could have played, that seems to be a conversation I almost always only have with my lower rated students. My higher rated students don't get higher rated if they don't understand that it only takes one bad move to lose a game, and they try their best on every move. So if I'm giving a video on how to win at chess, it has to start, if it doesn't start with telling you to play terrible people that you can beat easily, then it has to start with trying your best on every move. Does that guarantee you're going to win the game? No, nothing really guarantees that you're going to win a game other than an opponent who's so bad they can't possibly do anything but lose. But if you don't try your best on every move, then you're really not going to do very well. And a lot of people on the internet, they want to play all 10-minute games. Well, if that's fun for them, all right, more power to them. They can play all 10-minute games. But chess is a thinking game, and if you want to learn how to think right, you have to have time to think. If you want to win games, you have to make good moves. Well, if you want to make good moves, that means you have to make better moves than you were making before if you weren't making good moves before and you weren't winning. And to make better moves means you have to find better moves. To find better moves, you either have to memorize more openings, end games, and stuff like that, or you have to analyze better and evaluate better so that when you don't know what to do, you can find better moves. There's a difference between memorizing better moves, like learning an opening better, and getting into the middle game and the end game and doing better analysis and finding better moves. And that takes skill and it takes time. So in order to win games, you need to consistently play slow. You have to learn how to think. You have to learn how to analyze. You have to learn how to evaluate the position. What are some other things you can do to try to win games? Well, we just said the obvious, which is you have to outplay your opponent. If your opponent's not so bad that you can't outplay them every game, then during that particular game, you're going to have to do better than they do. Now, does that mean that you have to do better on every single move to win the game? No, of course not. There's a lot of moves during the game that are non-critical, and there may be 8 moves if you give it to the engine where the evaluation is only different by, let's say, 2/10 of a pawn on your top 8 moves. Well, that's called a non-critical move, and those are the moves where you don't want to take a lot of time. You want to save your time for the complicated, complex, critical moves, and you want to play those moves relatively quickly, because if you don't, you're going to run out of time, and when you get the critical moves, you're not going to play very well, and you're not going to win. So if you play the non-critical moves relatively quickly, if you can recognize they're non-critical, and then when you get to the critical positions, If you can outplay your opponent during the critical positions, if you can save your time, recognize the critical positions, and take your time during the critical positions and analyze carefully, evaluate carefully, look for different things, then you have a good chance to beat your opponent. So you don't have to be better than them on every move. If there's 40 moves in the game, let's say you and them both play a reasonable move on 20 of the 40, and then both sides make a couple mistakes that the other side may take some advantage of. But then there's a few moves during the game where it's really critical, and those are the moves where you outplay your opponent. That's how you win games. You can win games by doing that. I kind of found that secret when I started out. I became a pretty good analyst when I was about a year into my tournament play, but I didn't know a lot about openings or endgames and things like that. And what I found when I was like 1400 and I played people rated 1700 was if I could just hang in there, even though they knew the openings better and everything, if I hung in there until the game got complicated and I took my time and I calculated everything really carefully, I could probably beat those 1700s, and it turned out I could. And after, I was 1400 after about a year of play, and by the second year of play, right at the end of the second year, I got up to 1900. And a lot of it was by learning how to analyze well and to take my time and recognizing critical moves and looking really hard on the critical moves and making sure that I could outplay them when the complications came. All right, so let's take a position here. I know we haven't done a lot on the board. I just picked out one position from I had in my library. This position is black to play. So if you want to pause the video and, see if you can, quote, win the game. Well, maybe you can't win the game, but at least make the best move you can. Pause the video and tell me what move you would play. Okay, I assume if you've done that you're ready for the answer. Well, right now white is threatening bishop takes f8, winning the exchange. What is the exchange? It doesn't mean you're coming out ahead in the trade. It means you get a rook for a bishop or a knight. So if black does nothing, white will play bishop takes f8. Black will play queen takes f8. Then if you're white and you want to win, you should learn trade when you're ahead. You'd play queen takes f8, and black would recapture on f8, and you would be up the exchange in the endgame. So that's what white is threatening, but it's black's turn. Well, if you want to not lose that exchange, the most obvious move then is to move the rook so he can't take it. So you could look at a move like rook to e8. All right, so that's a move. But in chess, when you see a good move, you look for a better one. All right, so can we do better than play rook to e8? Let's see if we can find a better move. If we can't, we'll settle for rook to e8. Well, notice that the bishop is attacked once by the queen and it's guarded once by the queen. Well, we can't take the bishop. We'd lose the queen for a bishop. But maybe we can do the idea that comes up a lot in chess games, which is remove the guard. Okay, so how could we remove the guard? Well, in order to do that, we need to attack the queen, and the most obvious way to attack the queen is to play rook to c4. Okay, so let's take a look at that move, rook to c4. Well, if he just moves the queen to a random square, we're going to take off the bishop, and he never gets the rook. So we need a place we can move the queen that would guard the bishop. We can't take the rook. If we take the rook, then white gets a rook. Black, let's say, gets the queen. Let's keep the bishop holding the e-pawn. White gets the rook here, but then I get the bishop. So I get a queen and a bishop for two rooks, and I'm left with a queen and a bishop against two rooks, which should be enough to win the game. So he can't do that. All right, so what else could he do? He could play queen to a3 and continue to guard the bishop. But now I can play rook takes a4, winning a pawn for free, and he still needs to guard the bishop. He has to play something like queen to c4. Then I could play rook to c5, and if he plays back, I could try to save the rook now. And if he tries to take a pawn back to get a pawn back for the pawn he lost on a4, I can play rook c6 and double attack the bishop. And even if he guards it again, I will take it with the queen. Notice I don't take it with the lower rated piece. I take it with the piece that offers the trade. Queen takes d6, and I end up winning the bishop. All right, what does that mean? That means after rook c4, queen a3, rook takes a4, queen here, I could play rook c4. Or if I don't want to do that, I could simply move my rook now, and everything is guarded, and I'm just winning a pawn for nothing. Well, I'd rather win a pawn for nothing than just save my rook. So rook c4 is looking very promising. If that's the move you chose, okay. There's a problem, though. There's a couple problems. One problem is he doesn't have to take the rook right away. He can let the rook take him. White could play bishop takes f8 and get a rook, and then if I take the bishop, I'm down the exchange and he'll save the queen. But if I take his queen, he can take the piece that took the rook and take back. Bishop takes, and now white has ended up with 2 rooks for a queen. And if you know Reinfeld values, that's 5 and 5 versus 9. If you're using more sophisticated values, maybe it's not quite the same, but still the 2 rooks are worth almost as much. Now, black could get an extra pawn here, but now he's got 4 double pawns here, 2 sets of double pawns. Bishop's opposite color. I don't think white's going to have any trouble at all trying to save this game. So one of the problems with rook c4 is he can win 2 rooks for the queen. When I use the word win, I'm saying that 2 rooks are actually worth a little bit more than a queen here. So if you didn't consider the move bishop takes f8, then you're not completely analyzing rook c4 correctly, and then maybe when we're doing what we're trying to do in the video, which is how to win the game, you're not really winning the game here because you're not analyzing carefully. All right, are there any other ways to attack the queen? Well, we could play queen to a5. I think that's probably a bad move. He'll just take my queen. All right, well, how about a5? Well, that is guarded by my queen, so he can't just take it. But look at this pawn. It's attacked twice and guarded only once. But the problem is if he takes it with the pawn, I will take his queen with a pawn, and then I don't mind losing a rook for a bishop. And if he takes the pawn with the queen, then mission accomplished. The queen is not guarding the bishop anymore, and I can take the bishop. Queen takes d6. All right, what if I play a5 and he continues to guard the bishop? Well, he can't play queen c5 because the rook takes c5. So he has to play queen a3. How did that help us? Well, now we have what's called interference. Not a common chess idea, but one that does help. And in this case, it's a combination of interference and removal of the guard. We can play b4, interfering with the queen guarding the bishop. Again, if he plays bishop takes f8, I can play b takes a3, and if he plays bishop takes a3, I've won a queen for a rook and a pawn. On the other hand, if he takes the pawn after b4, if he takes the pawn with a pawn, then I take his bishop, pinning the pawn to the queen, and I win a bishop for a pawn. If he takes the pawn with a bishop, it's guarded by the pawn. I get a bishop. He gets another pawn. Let's say he takes with this pawn. So, all right, in this line, he gets 2 pawns for the bishop, but that's not enough. I'm up a bishop, and my 2 rooks, my queen and my bishop, should be able to fight against his queenside pawns and eventually win the game. Will it be trivially easy? No, black shouldn't resign or anything, but I'm winning the bishop for the 2 pawns. That's a big deal here. All right, so let's summarize this part of the puzzle for how to win in chess. One way you win in chess is when you see a good move, saving the rook, don't just play it and say, that's the only move that saves my rook. You look for a better one. What's a better one? Well, rook c4 could be a better one, but it turned out this doesn't quite work, although it might be a little bit better than moving rook e8, or maybe slightly worse, but it turns out it's not the right idea. And then we have this interesting idea, hit the queen with a pawn, move him away, and then interfere with the queen's ability to guard the bishop while we're attacking the queen, and we're going to end up winning material. So if you found a5 and b4, bravo, you've got the right move. If you just played rook e8 and said, Dan, you told me how to win and I know how to win, it's not, don't give up a rook for a bishop, well, that's true. But if you want to beat people and they give you these kind of opportunities, you have to be alert. You have to look at all the possibilities for the checks, captures, and threats. And when you get these critical positions, you want to play it the best you can. Okay, so I have some notes here on beating people on how to win at chess as opposed to how to improve at chess. I have some notes here. I have a note that says, make safe moves and try to make sure that you know when your opponent doesn't make safe moves. So if you're not asking yourself if your moves are safe, and you make moves and then your opponent does something to you and you go, oh, whoops, what do I do about that? Then you're not going to win too many games. Be aware when the opponent makes unsafe moves. If you think you're playing someone who's good and they're never going to make unsafe moves and you don't ask yourself if their moves are safe and it turns out they do make unsafe moves and then you don't take advantage of it, then you can't beat them. You can only beat them if you have a chance to beat them. So I always tell people you want to play with aggression and confidence and respect for your opponent's moves and ideas. If you play with aggression and confidence, you'll have a chance to beat people. If you're playing people better than you and you think you're going to lose, then you're going to lose because it'll be like a self-fulfilling prophecy. You'll play afraid, and if you play afraid, you can't win. So one way you can win at chess, name of the video, is play with confidence, play with aggression. All right, I have another note that says, make tricky moves. Well, you don't want to make tricky moves that are bad moves, but if you cause your opponent problems, if you say, I'm going to give you a problem to solve and you have to figure out how you're going to do something here, and if he does it right, he's okay. If he does it wrong, he loses, then you're causing him problems, and causing your opponent problems is something that you really like to do. You want to give him something to think about. All right, we've talked about outplaying the opponent in critical situations, keeping the initiative. All right, if you can get a position where you develop all your pieces and your opponent's fooling around and hasn't developed all his pieces, then you should be able to have the initiative and you should be able to keep being the one that makes threats and he's the one who has to keep responding. And if that's true, then you're going to win. It's just like, suppose you castle opposite sides and you attack his king, and instead of him trying to counterattack your king, he just tries to defend on the side where his king is. You're probably going to win almost all the games like that because that's not the right strategy. When you cast opposite sides, it's whoever gets there first wins. If you attack their king and they just sit there trying to guard their king, you're probably going to win because they don't understand the strategy. So that'll help you keep the initiative. If you develop all your pieces in the opening, if you move every piece once before you move any piece twice unless there's a tactic, and you're playing one of the many people who play chess who don't do that, and they only bring out 3 or 4 pieces and keep moving them around and around and around, you're probably going to end up with the initiative. If you don't believe that, you could read my article I wrote for chess.com called How Did John Keir Win His Second Tournament 6-0? It tells you all about that. Okay, here's another note for winning. Play gambits against low-rated players. What kind of gambits? Well, it could be the Black Mardimar gambit, could be the Marshall attack and the Roy Lopez, although low-rated players are never going to let you play the Marshall because they wouldn't get that far. You can play, if you want to play a King's Gambit, a Danish Gambit, Mora Gambit against a Sicilian, whatever. Why do gambits work against low-rated players? Because all the beginner books are all set up for how to play and win, and they're not set up for how to play and defend. So beginners learn how to attack first and win things first. They're not very good at defending. And they also, even if you sack a pawn in the opening for the initiative, they're not very good about winning games when they're up a pawn. So even if you misplay it and you're down a pawn, you probably are not in that much danger. So when you're playing low-rated people, if you're low-rated and they're low-rated, if you're both rated below, 1,200, then you could probably play gambits and have a lot of fun and not have that much risk. So that's another way you can win. So play gambits in the opening. You could play openings that are complicated. If you know a complicated opening and your opponent doesn't know it, then you have a good chance of winning. For instance, when you play, if people fall into the fried liver attack, which is more not an opening, it's really just a trap in the two knights defense. One of the reasons white does so well in the two knights defense is not only does white have a good position, but it's hard for black to defend. His king's in the middle of the board, and there's a lot of ways, if he doesn't understand the initial ideas on how to set up a defense, there's a lot of ways he can lose really, really quickly. And that's why people like to do stuff like that, because, their opponents get all confused and they just fall apart. Okay, let's see here. What else? Play with aggression and respect. So one of the ways you can win in chess is if you are winning and you want to win the game, put yourself in your opponent's shoes when you're winning and say, if I were him and I wasn't resigning, what would I do to try to get back in the game? and try to figure out those ways he could get back. Can he back rank mate you? Can he trap your queen? Can he win your rook in the corner? Whatever way it would be that he might try to get back in the game, make sure he can't do it. That's why I tell people, think defense first. Don't play defensively. That's not the same thing. But your first thing in your thought process, in your order of what you're trying to do, is make sure he can't get back in the game. If you want to win games and you're winning and you're consistently throwing them away, you want to pretend you're your opponent and say, what would I do if I were him? And then make sure he can't do it. If there's a back rank mate there, create luft. Make sure he can't back rank mate you. So one way to win games when you're winning with technique is to pay a lot of attention to what your opponent is doing. Ask yourself, how would I get back in the game if I were him? And make sure whatever that is can't happen. You win a lot more games if you can win when you're winning. If you have a lot of games where you're winning and you throw those games away because you played too slow early in the game and you got into time trouble, or you didn't pay attention to what they were doing, or you got overconfident, that's silly. You should be never losing games for those reasons, but there's very easy ways to fix that so you can win chess games. So today we talked about winning chess games. Win chess games, it's a great name for a video. It gets a lot of hits. Who knows how many hits I'll get on this video, maybe 1 or 2 more than I normally do. Hopefully you enjoyed today's video and will help you win more chess games. See you next time. Thanks. Bye.